Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another one of the panels with Freeland Film Festival. This panel is entitled State of the Lake, and we brought together some of the local experts sharing their time and expertise to talk about Big Green Lake in Green Lake, Wisconsin. And I have just a few slides to show you for introductions. Well, as you know, this panel, State of the Lake, is part of the third annual Freeland Film Festival. And of course, as you know, most of the festivals are virtual and are online. And I suspect that if we ever do return to normal where we can meet face to face, that we'll also have side by side a virtual festival going along with the face to face one. Freeland is a counter-trafficking nonprofit organization that's been combating wildlife trafficking and human slavery since the early 2000s. And it was founded by Steve Galster. His office is in Bangkok. The only office here in North America is right here in the city of Green Lake. And so that's the main mission of Freeland. And these stories that inspire these panels that occur are to raise people's awareness on what people can do, how they can become inspired by attending the film festival and watching success stories. Today, we are going to be talking about Big Green Lake, Wisconsin. Our panelists are myself. I'll be serving as moderator. I'm representing the Green Lake Conservancy Land Trust. We have Derek Kavanaugh. Derek is a soil conservationist with the Green Lake County Land Conservation Office. Stephanie Prellwitz. Stephanie is the executive director of the Green Lake Association. Lisa Reas, she's the administrator for the Green Lake Sanitary District. And then Dr. Dale Robertson, who is a research hydrologist with the USGS. So all of these people that I mentioned collaborate for managing the watershed and managing water quality and seeking to improve that. Green Lake is in Green Lake County, located in east central Wisconsin. And the slide that you're looking at right now is showing Green Lake itself and then the surrounding watershed. And the watershed actually encompasses two counties, Green Lake County, which accounts for approximately 60% of the watershed area, and Fond du Lac County to the east, which accounts for the remainder. It's a fairly large watershed, and you can see that it's very agricultural, probably close to 60% of the land area can be classed as agriculture. About 70,000 acres, 141 miles of streams, rivers, and outside of Green Lake, about 650 acres of lakes, and a fair amount of wetlands as well. This is an aerial looking off to the south. The two smaller lakes in front of you are Kettle Lakes, East and West Twin Lake, and in the foreground is a portion of Green Lake, Big Green Lake. Some basic water facts about Green Lake. It is Wisconsin's deepest natural inland lake at 237 feet. It averages about 100 feet. About 7,400 acres, the length 7 miles, and the width is 2 miles shoreline pretty significant, 27.3 miles, and it has a lake retention time of 19 years. So just calculating an average water entering the lake until it leaves the lake is about 19 years. So it has a very large volume. And because it is a deep lake, it's a two-tier fishery, warm water fishing, as well as cold water. And here we have a happy fisherman with a lake trout just brought through the ice, which is a cold water species. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop the slides here. And first, I'd like to turn to Dale Robertson. And Dale, could you tell us a little bit, you can add to what I just said about Green Lake. And Green Lake has gauging stations, which many people, they made here locally, they may drive by the station. They don't know really what it is or what it does, where these are located. And then as a follow-up to that, if you could spend a little time talking about an that was declared in 2014 by the Wisconsin DNR, and talk about that impairment and what's being done to monitor it and mitigate that.
Sure. Tom, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, what I want to do is sort of give an overall state of the lake, describe the water quality of Green Lake a little bit, some of the things that Tom was talking about, the kind of monitoring we're doing. And after that, what I want to do is very quickly to try to describe how we're trying to use all this information to determine what needs to be done to improve the water quality of the lake. As Tom showed before, this is a map of Green Lake. It is the deepest natural lake in the state of Wisconsin. And because of that, people have gotten to really love the lake for a number of reasons. People around the lake really like its water quality. The scientists like it because it is the deepest lake out there, and they try to study it. Now, through time, the water quality has degraded a little bit, and that's really got a lot of people interested in how it's changed. And so with that, what we're doing right now is monitoring the lake, but this monitoring program goes way back. It started in the early 1900s with some scientists out of the University of Wisconsin. Then it continued on with some university studies. Then in the DNRs, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources started studying it. And then in 2004, the USGS started a fairly rigorous monitoring program in which we monitor the two ends of the lake, the west, the deep end, and the east, a little bit shallower side. So we've got a long history of that. And that started in about, the USGS started in 2004. In 1987, we started trying to monitor the watershed, trying to figure out what's coming in from that agricultural watershed that Tom was describing, and trying to describe everything that gets into the lake. So with that, through time, we've developed a massive data set. This just shows a few of the things that we typically measure in the lake itself. We measure things like what is the problem itself, which is excess nutrients getting to the lake. We measure that with phosphorus. The problem itself with is excess algae. That's one of the things out there when the lake turns a little greener. And finally, we look at the result of the problem, which is the water clarity. And we come up with long time series for each of these. As Tom was mentioning, if you go around the outskirts of the watershed, you'll start to see some of our monitoring sites. You'll see these silver boxes with a little USGS sign on them. And what we do in these is that extending out of this box, we have a tube that goes into the water that measures the flow one way or the other. We'll either measure it with acoustic velocity meters or with what changes in elevation. But we also, if you look down here, we have tubes that go into the water where we collect water samples out of there, and we can measure how much nutrients is going down the stream. With that, we're able to come up with graphs that look like this. The top graph shows how much phosphorus is getting into that lake into the lake from Silver Creek every year. And you look at the top graph, it's sort of spiky, and that's really the result of big storm events that occur a real wet year. You'll see 1993 popping out there, a real wet year in the Midwest. So we can figure out how much nutrients are getting in there. We can also look at the water quality of that itself and show you the concentration of the water coming in, and you can see it's declined, which is good through time. And that, a big result that's really caused by actions taken in the watershed, sewage treatment plant improving, and also a wetland changing, and various best management practices. Now, when we look at all that water quality, we have a lot of it, but we try to summarize it into summer averages, and that's what I've shown here. So for those main three that I was talking about, we have the nutrients, the algae, and the water clarity, and we start to see a little bit of, things are not changing real dramatically, and that's partially because of Green Lake's size, but we do get a lot of information from this. And what we see now is by looking at that phosphorus concentration, for a two-storied fishery that Tom was mentioning, you want to keep that number below 15 micrograms per liter. And right now you can see, if we look at that number up here, we're typically a little bit higher than that. So the lake could be listed as impaired for phosphorus. If we look at the bottom, even though it looks like the water quality is getting a little worse, the water is getting clearer through time. And that seems to be contradictory. But what happens is we've had some invasive zebra mussels come in and improve the water clarity of the lake. So right now, the last dots are really where we are in terms of the lake conditions. Now, that's not the only thing that we look at when we're monitoring the lake. We also look at things through the water column from the top of the lake to the bottom, and this is the dissolved oxygen. In order to get those lake trout to live anywhere in the lake, they need oxygen. And so what I've shown is this is just some stuff from a few years ago, and it's actually what got the lake declared as impaired for oxygen. In the springtime, we have phosphorus at about 13 at the top, down to about 10 at the bottom. But as summer progresses, we move across this and we see oxygen depleted at the bottom of the lake. This is out at over 60 meters and right about the thermocline, or the middle of the lake. And we start to see it being depleted here. Now, in there, according to the DNR, they have standards for all of these lakes, and lakes in general want to keep the dissolved oxygen above 5. And you can see in the middle of the lake, it's starting to be impaired. Okay, so what do we do about all this? Well, we've got a lot of data out there, and what we're trying to do now is take all of that and trying to see what we can do in the watershed to improve this. And that requires a lot of different kinds of models. This is just one of them. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're taking all of that information we have on stream flow, what's coming down in the weather conditions, and putting into a model called GLM. That's a general lake model. And that describes how the lake mixes and so forth. Then we add the nutrients. That's all that information that's coming in from the watershed. We put this into the model and simulate how the lake changes, how the nutrients increase, how that cause the algae to grow, how that causes other something that we call zooplankton, small little bugs in the water to grow, and ultimately deplete the oxygen. So we're simulating how the nutrients are changing and how the oxygen is changing. Once we get that, we put it into a graph like this that shows the loading on the bottom and the concentration or the oxygen on that other axis. So when we do this, the model says that we should have a concentration of about 18 here, or 0.018. We measured about 0.02 that I was talking about. So we get an idea of how well the models work. After that, then we run the model over and over again with changes in loading from the watershed, and we get this response curve. So with 100%, if loading doubled 100%, we'd see the concentration would go up here to about 0.03, getting worse. If we reduce the loading by 50%, we can see we're getting closer to that standard. Now for us, we want to get it down to 15. So by just reading off this graph, we can see we need about a 45% reduction in loading. Okay, we did the same thing for oxygen, and we got about a 35 to 45% reduction. So with all that information now, that tells us how we have to reduce the loading. Then from there, we go into the watershed, work with other people that are on the call to try to reduce that input. So that's the water quality of the lake, and that's how we come up with goals to try to improve the water quality. So with that, I'll stop sharing it and pass it on.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Stephanie, could you, two questions. First, could you talk a little bit about legacy phosphorus? And I know the GLA has been involved with looking at how to mitigate legacy phosphorus, but maybe explain what that is. And the second follow-up question is, we've had a lake management plan now for several years. It's been updated, I believe, at least 3 times. And then I'll add one more thing, one more question to that. You were instrumental with working with Charlie Marks, I believe maybe Mark Sessing as well, with the EPA's 9 elements watershed management plan. So if you could kind of tie those all together.
You bet. Sure. I'm going to take a step. I'll answer all of your questions. I think I'm going to take a step back. For me, it's often helpful to think about Green Lake's water quality challenges in terms of weight loss. So hang with me here. But I think we're all familiar with when we're trying to lose weight, we assess our BMI, our body mass index, and that's grouped into healthy, overweight, obese. And we do the same things for our lakes. Instead of calculating a BMI, we calculate something called TSI, trophic state indices. And we take the quality of our lakes and we group them into different categories: oligotrophic, which is good; mesotrophic, which is okay; and eutrophic and hypereutrophic, which is bad. Green Lake used to be an oligotrophic lake. It was a healthy lake, but now it's overweight. It's mesotrophic. And so what we're hearing is that it's kind of the equivalent of your doctor telling you that you're pre-diabetic, right? So it's not critical yet, but we're concerned. And Green Lake is showing some warning signs for us. It's showing that it has this dead zone in the middle part of the lake, a low dissolved oxygen zone that Dale talked about, and its phosphorus levels are too high. And so that is why the lake is listed as impaired. And so what do we want to do? We want to lose weight. And in terms of lakes, that means that we want to reduce our phosphorus calories. We're used to thinking about the fact that we should all aim for 2,000 calories a day. For Green Lake, we know we're receiving over 20,000 pounds of phosphorus a year. Now, if we want to hit our ideal weight, our water quality goals, we need to reduce our phosphorus calories by 40 to 60%. And by the way, this all relates to the lake management plan. So how do we lose weight? We can do things like diet. And for us, that's like installing best management practices in the watershed, preventing those phosphorus pounds from ever hitting Green Lake. We can do things like exercise. We can look for pockets of kind of trapped phosphorus and remove them, burn through them, take them away. And so, Tom, you asked about this idea of what is legacy phosphorus. Legacy phosphorus is phosphorus that is kind of trapped and slowly burping phosphorus into the lake over time. So for example, Green Lake has legacy phosphorus in the bottom of the lake. Sedimentary phosphorus. This is kind of just at the very bottom of the lake, a phosphorus problem, and phosphorus is just continually released into the lake. So we won't achieve our expected water quality results if we don't understand the role of legacy phosphorus throughout our watershed. And finally, in terms of our weight loss reduction goals, we can do things like bariatric surgery. For our lakes, these are big technological interventions. So what is the lake, all of that to say, what is the lake management plan? The lake management plan is our weight loss plan. It summarizes for us Green Lake's issues, and it summarizes kind of how we want to achieve our ideal water quality goals. Now, this can get complicated because it's just not about diet and exercise and other things we can do. We have some things working against us, and Mother Nature is actually working against us. Through climate or through human-caused climate change, Green Lake is getting more intense, more frequent rain events. Dale talked about some of those big storm events. And that is like Mother Nature adding spoonfuls of sugar to our diet every day. So we have to do more and more just to kind of stay on track. So that the lake management plan is our weight loss plan for Green Lake. And Tom, you asked about the 9 key elements plan. The 9 key elements plan is simply a more rigorous lake management plan. And we work closely with the DNR and the EPA to take our lake management plan and turn it into a lake management plan on steroids. There are more requirements for tracking and more rigorous requirements for measuring, for example. And finally, the last thing that I'll say about all of this is that when we're trying this significant effort to lose weight, we can't do it without a medical team. And that medical team is the lake management planning team. So that involves the people on this call, the Green Lake Sanitary District, our land conservation departments, the Green Lake Association, the U.S. Geological Survey. Tom, you mentioned you're part of the Conservancy, and others. All of these people are working together for this common goal. So that is what the lake management planning team is for us, what the lake management plan is. And I think it's helpful to think about what we're trying to achieve in those terms.
Very good. Thanks for all of that. Eating a bowl of ice cream is not going to be the same anymore after this. So I also wanted to add, you mentioned about 20 tons annually of phosphorus.
20,000 pounds.
20,000 pounds. And just for the viewers, you may have learned this before, but 1 pound of phosphorus can contribute to
500 pounds of weeds and
300
algae
to 500 pounds. Yep. Okay. Lisa, I wanted to turn to you. You're with the Green Lake Sanitary District, which is a taxing municipality. And I guess I have a few questions. They're kind of short questions, and then I'll ask you another one right after that. Is that who are the property owners that reside in the sanitary district? Are there actual boundaries of the sanitary district? That the residents fall in?
We actually, our boundaries of the Green Lake Sanitary District encompass pretty much all the shoreland around Green Lake, with the exception of the city of Green Lake. And then we also, as part of our boundaries, have the majority of the sunny side area around Green Lake. So it's significant. We have about 1,000 customers within the district, 600 of which are actually sewered. The rest are on private on-site water treatment systems.
Okay. How many of those residents are permanent? Do you have that information?
We do, actually. Paulie and I were looking into that this week, and going off of our database of customers, about 43% of the numbers I just listed have Green Lake listed as their permanent address, and the rest all are the majority of them, of the remaining, are actually out of state.
There are some lakes that have formed lake districts. Green Lake happens to have a sanitary district. What can you distinguish those?
Sure. A sanitary district is generally formed for health and sanitation reasons, is when you get a certain density of development. On Green Lake, as the Green Lake Sanitary District boundaries encompass so much of the lakeshore, we actually qualify as a lake district. And a lake district, technically, their distinguishing characteristic is that they're formed to protect and enhance the lake that they are on. So we actually have a little bit more power than just a general sanitary district.
Okay. Can you summarize some of the studies that have been involved over the years? Maybe just pick out some examples with the sanitary district.
There's been quite a few, and other folks that are sitting here on the panel have been heavily involved with them. There's a lot of studies that have been done on Green Lake. There are plant inventory studies that are done every year. There are limnological studies that have been done in the past. There's the Green Lake Association did a farm ag outreach survey several years ago. So not just the science of what is in the lake and coming into the lake, but also the people that are impacting the watershed, what their views are, what their goals are. There's been nearshore habitat surveys. You showed the picture of the gentleman with the fish. That's Mark Sessing. He's our previous lakes coordinator from the DNR, and he's done the nearshore habitat survey. So we're studying, not just, again, what's coming into the lake, we're studying the habitat, the fishery, and then there's the ongoing DO study, which is a partnership, a very strong partnership between the Green Lake Association and Dale at the USGS. And that's still, that information is still forthcoming. But there's a lot of information. As Dale said, we have a lot of historical data that we have at our fingertips to kind of determine, where the lake is going. And we're all concerned. We have invasive species in the lake, and we see issues as far as blue-green algae blooms in the K Marsh. So all the studies that we have done with what we're actually seeing on the ground, definitely point to some issues that we have.
Is K Marsh starting to flip, where it was open water, it was revegetated? What is going on presently with K Marsh?
So the K Marsh is unfortunately contributing a disproportionate amount of phosphorus into the lake. We've known that for a long time. Part of the problem is that the agricultural runoff that we're seeing coming into the marsh, in addition to just the shape of the marsh and how it sits and how wind-driven wave action is allowed to roll across the marsh, all of these factors together keep it very turbid. The water's very, it's not very clear. Light's not penetrating to the bottom of the marsh to allow for a lot of plants to grow. And so the team that you see sitting here, this partnership, has been working to kind of counteract that. We've done plantings of aquatic plants. We've done exclosures of areas to try and protect part bays and smaller areas from carp and wind-driven wave action to see if we can get aquatic plants to grow. Because if we can get aquatic plants to establish, those root systems are going to help hold sediment in place. They're going to help clarify the water. And once that water starts to clarify, we're going to get additional plant growth. And as you mentioned, Tom, then we'll see it flip, where we go from this basically chocolate milk that seems to be flowing under the K Bridge to clear water and a healthier ecosystem. So we are not there. I like to think every year we seem to be moving closer, and the indicators that we're moving closer are there's a lot more vegetation in the K Marsh now than has ever been seen before. Unfortunately, a good amount of it is curly-leaf pondweed, which is an invasive, but those plants are still helping hold the sediment in place and helping the water to clear. So we're hopeful. The biggest factor that's working against us, other than the land use in the watershed, is what you'd said. It's the weather. And I think I'm the only person I know who's ever cheering for a drought, because the less runoff we having coming into the K Marsh, the clearer that water is going to be, and it's going to help this process along.
Well, that's a good segue to a question for Derek. Phosphorus is a main limiting nutrient for aquatic growth in lake systems. And what form of phosphorus, Derek, how is it being transported into the lake? Is it attached to sediment particles? Is it soluble in the lake water itself for the tributary streams that feed into Green Lake? Is it 50-50? How does that work?
We've been kind of seeing a shift in the waters itself, but the main way phosphorus is moving is through particle attached sediment, water coming off of farm fields, roadways, other hard surfaces that are carrying soil, and that phosphorus seems to stay attached, unlike nitrates, which will dissolve right out and move through groundwater. There are some dissolved phosphorus forms that will move through groundwater, but that tends to be near the stream areas where it's heavily saturated. So we are seeing a shift a little bit into dissolved forms in some of the local streams, but that may be due to that we're reducing some of the particulate phosphorus and kind of pushing that over into dissolved. But
Well, as
our main goal as a conservation practice, of best management practice, is to stop that soil movement on the land.
could you speak to some of those best management practices or BMPs? That
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up my screen here. I think that's not the right one. There we are. Are we seeing that?
yes.
All right. Oh, where's a little too far into it. Okay. So this here is kind of goes a little bit to what you're alluding to, is we basically have a process of erosion. So the first thing is detachment. That's when the raindrops are impacting the soil. And if you don't have cover on that soil, if it's bare farm fields, that's where that soil comes loose. It's carried downhill either through gullies or waterways. And then the final stage is deposition. Now the question is, where does that deposition happen? Is it in Green Lake, or is it somewhere on the landscape in between? So one of our first lines of defense is keeping the soil covered all the time. If that's with no tilling, with leaving corn stalks and stuff on the field as many months a year as we can in between croppings, if that's cover crops. The conveyance, this is one of our best management practices, is instead of letting water run just across bare fields, we install designed waterways that are to the depth and width that we need for a 10-year storm event, so one of our 2-inch storms. Also part of that transport is we're getting so much water running off with larger storms that our streams can no longer handle that amount of flow, and the stream banks start to erode. So we've spent a lot of time working with all the partners here on restoring thousands of feet of stream banks, making the stream banks flatter so streams can spread out and dissipate that energy. And here's one example of a stream that we restored that runs into Green Lake. You can see we flattened all the banks back. That stream can now hold about 8 times as much water within its banks that it did prior to restoration. And what you're seeing here is erosion control matting that holds the seed and soil in place until the grass gets to grow.
Where's that location right there?
This one here is just south of Big Twin Lakes. This is on the south side of County K. Then our final stage is deposition, and we construct quite a few basins. And this is a downstream. We're looking up at a basin, but this one here is about 18 feet tall, and it holds 300 acres worth of runoff behind there, and it's let out slowly through the pipe you see there. That's about a 3-foot diameter pipe.
So that previous slide, the sediments, they're trapped in the basin.
Yep.
And
they're trapped in the basin. So on this next slide, I'll give you a little better idea. This is the inside of a basin. This one does run to Green Lake, and it's just a few hundred feet from the shore of Green Lake. You can see where my pickup truck is parked here. During a rainfall event, the pickup will basically be underwater, and water would probably be up past this bulldozer here. So there's several acres of water that collect back here. As water sits still, that sediment and the phosphorus associated with it drops out and stays in the basin. And then the water goes up through a pipe down the corner here. And about every 10 years or so, we come and take the soil out of here and move it back to the upland. So it's kind of a maintenance practice. It's effective. It's more expensive than preventing detachment, but it's something that definitely works. But as you can see, this is a landowner here who gave up probably 4 or 5 acres of cropland for this practice. And as far as the money that goes into these things, there's money from the DNR, from the Sanitary District, from the Green Lake Association, from NRCS, the federal government, that we all pull funds from to pay for these types of practices.
I have a question. Derek, how much does that practice cost, that one that you're showing us?
This one right here is probably about $40,000. The previous one was probably about 70,000. Plus, we bought the land on that one. That particular picture was from the Green Lake or Little Green Lake Sanitary District, but similar idea.
Are those basins perpetual then?
So we have in this watershed, not all of them. So if we build them anywhere else in the county, they need to be maintained for 10 years. Then the landowner is free to do what they want with them. We highly encourage them to stay in place, and most of them stay at least somewhat intact. Some start to degrade over time. We have a unique relationship here with the Green Lake Sanitary District, where they kick in extra funding to build these, and in exchange for that, the landowners put a 99-year or perpetual agreement on here, so they are permanently in place on these landscapes.
And not only are they permanently in place, but often, as Derek mentioned, we combine funding sources to make them, in many instances, we ease the burden of them. And in some instances, we try to make them free for the landowner by combining funding sources. Because if you're a farmer and you have what did you say, Derek? This could be $70,000 or $40,000 for this practice. You know, at the end of the day, a farmer, you might still owe $10,000. And that's a lot, especially because you're giving up that farmable area. So we try to kind of sweeten the pot, keep them installed in perpetuity, and reduce the burden of paying for a lot of these practices as a way to increase participation in best management practices. And when I say we, I mean collectively, not just the Green Lake Association, but everyone on this call and the partners that Derek mentioned.
And one thing I want to mention too is a lot of this conservation is not just a practice, it's more of a system. So in this particular farm, you can see part of it in the upper left side of the screen here, is we put, I think, nearly 3/4 mile of grass diversions on here. So basically they go across the slope, so as the water hits them, it stops the water and then moves it sideways to a waterway, then down. If you can see can you see my pointer?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So as it comes down here, it comes through a waterway and then down this side and dumps into the basin. And then we encourage no-till also. So we try to kind of stack all these systems because they get much, much more efficient if it's a stacked system versus just a practice for a catch-all.
And to see how this all affects your diet, we have a gauge downstream of most of these, and we can find out how that's changing, how much phosphorus is reaching into the lake. So the net effect of all this, we can see how that's affecting what Stephanie was talking about in terms of the number of calories intake. We can see how this affects how much your phosphorus intake into the lake.
I had a question about cover crops. Derek, can you explain that?
So cover crops, what we've been trying to work with. So cover crop is basically a crop that's not harvested for agricultural products, so it's not sold, but it's put on after your crop is harvested to try to protect that soil in between fall harvest and spring planting. The challenge that comes into some of these areas why everyone doesn't use them is because if your corn is coming off in November, the cover crop's not going to grow high enough by the time it freezes to have a lot of effect. So if it's something like a canning crop, a snap pea or a green bean, then we can encourage the farmers to put a winter wheat or something in there to cover that soil and protect it. But it's something that can't be used in all cropping systems. That's why no-till is a very good option also.
How many farms in the county?
I don't have
Roughly.
As Derek madly Googles that answer.
There's fewer and fewer. I say there's fewer and fewer operators. So in the Green Lake watershed, we probably have a half dozen major operators, and then a few dozen smaller farms. But most of the land is run by a handful of people.
Okay.
And the one thing I will mention. With our best management practices, we've been changing over the last 20 years of designing is that we're starting to see these storm sizes shift. So we typically design to like a 10-year storm, but this here is some data from the university that's just showing a 1 year or a 1-inch storm event. So this is days per year of getting 1 inch or greater storms. You can see Green Lake County, which is here, is shifting slightly, maybe an extra day or two a year, which isn't major. And that's kind of what we've seen in a lot of our design data. This is where we're seeing the bigger shift. This is days per 100 years. So this is a 100-year storm event. You can see that we're getting a lot more of these larger storm events occurring more often. So by definition, statistically, this should only happen, once every 100 years. These are days per 100 years, so it's a little bit off, but you can see how the colors are just changing. We're getting more and more of these large, intense storms more frequently, which affect how big we have to build these basins. We have to build these berms higher, waterways deeper, pipes larger to hold these things. So,
and it becomes more challenging to reduce that phosphorus, like Stephanie was saying, 40 to 60%. To get down to the standard. And,
if I could, and we're
yeah.
seeing the effect of these storms. So in our region, 2016, 2017, and then 2018 were the wettest years on record in the last 100 years. So the power and the erosion and the phosphorus that makes its way to Green Lake doesn't just flow over the Puckian River and we're done with it. I mean, that stays with us for decades. So we live with it's just an annual problem. We live with these storms for many years, and they affect Green Lake's water quality, and they're making it harder and harder to kind of stay on top of keeping it ahead of them.
Okay, was that your last slide, Derek?
Yeah, I threw this up just kind of, this is the Fox River outside of Princeton, but this is what we see on the landscape more frequently. We're seeing flooding into the watershed, which is designed to do, but we're seeing it more and more frequently, 3-4 times a year, some years, instead of once every 3 to 4 years. So
on the West Coast, they're having the mega fires. Here in the upper Midwest, and elsewhere too, we're getting these large, frequent events contributing to flooding. Kind of along the same line, Dale, I wanted to ask you, are there any quantitative trends for climate change impact on less days of ice? And if there's less days of ice, does that impact water quality in any significant way? Is there any evidence for that?
Well, there's definitely evidence for climate change in terms of shortening ice cover. Here in Wisconsin, ice covers dropped about 30 days. Most of that's occurred since 1980. So it's been a pretty rapid change. And so we do see falls that are warmer, springs that are warmer. How that affects water quality, it's a little bit more subtle. But one of the things that we really potential is this thing I was talking about with dissolved oxygen. The dissolved oxygen in the middle of the lake has a big to-do, or how bad it is really sort of driven by how long the summer lasts. And if the summer starts to last longer and longer, we'll run out of more and more oxygen in the middle of the lake. So yes, it will degrade the water quality a little bit. It could also increase the amount of algae in the lake. That I don't know if we've seen yet, but I think we have seen the effect on the dissolved oxygen.
Okay. We're approaching 60 minutes, and I do have some questions that were submitted by the audience. And I'll just throw this out, and whoever would like to take the question, you can. The first question comes from Kristen, and I have to get close to this so I can read it. What's the best thing that individuals can do in their own behavior to help take care of the bodies of water where they live?
I would say to think about what you can do to with the individual raindrops that are falling on your property. Think about the life of a raindrop, and everything. Your goal is to make sure that that raindrop goes into the ground instead of into the lake, running off the street, picking up dog waste, picking up phosphorus from leaves. So if you can do things like diverting your downspout so that your downspout goes into your grassed yard, will go into the ground versus into your driveway, or plant a rain garden, or keep your leaves out of the road. If you can slow down those raindrops, because as Derek said, there's a lot of power in those raindrops, and they erode, they cause problems downstream. So also, if you can have less impervious area, that's better. We want to slow down the raindrops so they don't have as much power to erode streams or pick up pollutants along the way. So that would be my suggestion, is to think about how to make your individual raindrops go into the ground versus going across the landscape.
And one thing I would mention too, so people that live right on a lake, they obviously know the water is feet away, but also people that live in the city, say the city of Ripon, if we've got 3,000 or 4,000 houses, the lake is basically as far away as the curb. Because once the water gets into the roadway, into that storm sewer, it's in a concrete pipe directly to Silver Creek and directly to Big Green. There's no filtration in between there. So it's easier for 3,000 or 4,000 houses in Ripon to each individually do one thing in their gutter, take their gutters and put the downspout on the lawn, than it is for us to try to build a massive storage and treatment system that would probably be much less efficient.
There's another issue that I don't think we've spent a lot of time on, but has jumped out to me in the last year. Home construction sites on the shoreline areas around Green Lake. I've seen some scary things in the last year with some of these big rain events where people are expecting a little silt fence to hold back, quite a bit of bare soil from digging out foundations. And I think that if you're a landowner around Green Lake and you're putting up a house, or you will be soon, and there's a crazy amount of construction going on around here, work with your contractor and hold them accountable. What you do on your lot or what your contractor does on your lot matters to the lake, and you need to make sure that things are being done correctly, that silt fence and additional erosion control is being used. Because as Stephanie said, once that soil gets in the lake, it's with us forever. So you may think it's a minimal issue, but it's not.
Yeah, I have one other suggestion. Drink more water. So we'll go on to the next question here. And this is for anybody. Should there be a standard in educating K-12 children in their schools of curriculum as far as environmental science goes? I'm probably the only educator on the panel right here, and I would say, well, duh, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that, there's a lot of challenges with teaching curriculum, but at least from the county standpoint, we do work with a lot of classes. If they request it, we'll take classes out into the stream. We'll do stream monitoring. We'll come to the classroom and do, macroinvertebrate identification for water creatures, water testing. We do all kinds of things just upon request in the area. So.
Yeah, Derek is really good about going out. They look at macroinvertebrates. So he takes students out and they look at the types of bugs that are in the stream and what that indicates about the water quality. So it's really fun to get out there with him.
Lisa, do you know if they're doing any biotic indexing? Have they continued that with the tributaries on Green Lake?
I believe so. I'm not positive on that. Stephanie, did you know?
Yeah, they are. There's a group through the DNR called Water Action Volunteers, and these are volunteers who go out once a month on streams throughout the watershed, and they do grab samples and take take some measurements. And one of the things that they do every year is a biotic index, which again is looking at the bugs, the biology that's in the lake, and helps. I guess it'd be like, I'm going to go back to my weight loss thing. It'd be like maybe the equivalent of checking your cholesterol, right? So taking a sample of what's there in the stream and determining what it says about the overall health of that stream.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Another question. This is from Evelyn. Do you attribute the fact that the lake literally was more, quote, green this year to more boat traffic, climate, or anything else, or all the above?
Dale,
I'll take a shot at that one, I guess. It's probably all the above, but I think the biggest thing, depending on what you're calling green, we actually had a little bit drier year in a lot of ways in terms of how much runoff we had during the summer, but we did have a lot of pondweed that came in. And so it depends on exactly how you call it green. What happens is that we get a lot of growth up in some of the wetlands and they get flushed out with a little bit of a storm event. And we did have a really bad one this year where we had some plants that were floating on the surface of the wetlands that got washed in. But in general, we have seen the last few years a little worse than the other ones because of increased rainfall.
Yeah, I've noticed large colonies of duckweed, especially after a precipitation event. You can see the current in the lake just by looking at the duckweed.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think that the lake, it was very cold, the water temperatures all the way through the very beginning of June, but then the lake temperatures jumped very quickly as you know, we had those 90-degree temperature weeks. And I think that also contributed to it. The blue-green algae that we saw this year in the County K Marsh, the DNR commented on that we would see peaks and valleys with the blue-green algae amounts in the marsh correlating with temperature spikes. And I think that's what we saw there. And Dale, I would ask you if you think that overall in the lake, if we would see the same thing with just regular algae.
It's a very tough one because you got a lot of things interacting. One of the things that happens in Green Lake more than other lakes is that you get that big spring flush of nutrients and it starts to be used up by all the algae. So it's really a timing. You have to hit the warm, non-windy days when you got the nutrients around to do it. So sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't. Not that simple.
One of the things I think it's important to clarify is it depends on what you mean by that the lake is more green. So I think it's just worth noting that we get a lot of inquiries from people about, I see a lot of algae on the surface of the lake. And in fact, it is duckweed, which is a native plant. Often when you drive past the Silver Creek estuary and it's looking particularly green, that's not algae, it's duckweed. But duckweed can double its population every other day. But because it's a native plant, the Sanitary District, who operates the weed harvesting program, is limited to what they can do about it, and ducks love it. So there's this, it's a challenging situation. If you live on a lake, you don't live on a swimming pool. You know, this is a living system that is affected by so many things. And sometimes I think we come to expect our lakes to be pools and they're not. So there's a balance there about how to handle it. It's a difficult challenge. So the point is that if you see something green on the surface of the lake, it may be duckweed, not algae.
Mm-hmm. And I will mention that a lot of lakes in the area are having similar events this year. I think it's a combination of 3 years of continuously high flows and the temperatures, along with a lot of other factors, but on some of our systems.
Okay, we're approaching the top of the hour. We're about 8 minutes out or so, and we'll just go around the table here, and each of you can speak on. My question is, what does the future outlook look for Green Lake? Given what we know, what we continue to monitor, what is the outlook looking forward ahead?
You want me to start that?
Go ahead and start.
I'll start with the water quality. There has been some significant advances in the watershed in terms of nutrient reduction that have occurred. Most of those have started off with point sources. The amount of nutrients coming out of the Ripon wastewater treatment plant have dropped by probably 90% since 1970. So that's been a major plus. All the efforts in the watershed have been out there trying to reduce the loading, so that's good. But Mother Nature, as Stephanie was saying, is fighting against us. So that's sort of a seesaw battle. But my feeling is that we are going to see some, even though with climate change we are going to see some drier years, weather cycles I think we're going to see some drier years, and I think we will see an improvement in water quality, mainly because we're reducing the nutrient loading, and I think we're going to get some drier years. So that's my take.
Why do you think that we're going to have drier years?
Well, if you go through you see the Great Lakes, you see other places. There's a real oscillation in weather. It's about every 10 to 12 years, and you see it going through. The Great Lakes, just when you're all ready for high water, it starts to drop and we'll see a low water. And that's really the changes in fluctuating weather conditions. We've been up for several years. Yes, a lot of climate change models say that we can expect that, but I still think that you have that oscillation on top of a long-term trend. And so I think we're going to see some drier years coming. And with that, I think we're going to see a little bit better water quality.
I'm cautiously optimistic here at the Sanitary District. I think, you know, in our opinion, we need to see more being done in the watershed. You know, obviously Dale's numbers tell us what we need to reduce to get to where we need to be. Getting to that number takes a massive amount of effort, not only us as partners, but financially. One basin is $40,000. We need a heck of a lot of basins to make the kind of change we need in this watershed. But, you know, I would point out, you've got the Green Lake Sanitary District and the Green Lake Association this fall applying for hundreds of thousands of dollars to the DNR to do these things, to make these changes. And I know the Sanitary District has stepped up money that we've allocated in our budget to reach out to agricultural producers to offer incentives to do this. I know the Green Lake Association is doing similar, and land conservation is stepping up as well. So I feel like everybody's getting to that point where they see it and they're staging themselves to make a difference.
Yeah, I think the challenge that we have going forward is that we have a watershed of 68,000 acres, and that means, you know, there's 1,000 individual decision makers just on Big Green with waterfront property. There's another 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 in the agricultural settings. There's thousands in the city, and everyone has to make individual decisions each day and each year. What crops are going to go on your field? What type of practices are you going to maintain? And that's, you know, it's more people that we can talk to every year from our department. So, and people are selling land, changing ownership, and we have to re-educate people. So it's a moving target, and that's throwing in the economy and crop prices and everything else with people's decision making. It's going to be a big challenge. You know, it always has been, and we're getting, you know, better and better at it, but it's still like chasing a ball downhill some days.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I'm also cautiously optimistic because I think that we have to be. I think there's too much at stake to not do everything that we can on behalf of Green Lake. I talked to a Green Lake Association member, I think this year, and he borrowed this quote, but it just stays with me. We didn't inherit Green Lake from our ancestors. We're borrowing it from our grandchildren. And so we, I think, have an obligation to do everything that we can. And by golly, if we can't do it here in Green Lake, where can we do it? Because when you look around, the people that are in this panel, the people who live on Green Lake, the resources that we have a really exciting opportunity. And I'll tell you that people around the state are noticing. But as everyone's saying here, we have a challenge. We have to absolutely rescale our efforts, orders of magnitude above what we've done today. So I'm optimistic, and it'll be tough work, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think all of you have touched on the fact that what we do on land impacts water and water quality here in Green Lake and elsewhere. Of the over 15,000 lakes in the state of Wisconsin, we're living out a dream here, being living close to Green Lake. It's the gem of Wisconsin. Well, with that, this does conclude Freeland Film Festival's panel, State of the Lake. And I'd like to thank all of you panelists, Derek Kavanaugh with the Green Lake County Land Conservation Office, Stephanie Prellwitz with the Green Lake Association, Lisa Reas with the Green Lake Sanitary District, and Dale Robertson with the USGS thank you all for sharing your time and your expertise. And to you and all of our viewers, stay safe and be well.